this Epstein case is just spilling over and having so many impacts, so much impact across the globe, whether it's in Norway and Britain. Most recently, now the head of Dubai ports has had to step down, so it's really having a lot of consequences. And I know 3 members of your government have had to step down. Starmer's weakened, of course, through all this, and yet here in the United States, where it all kind of began, the epicenter of it, we've seen very little in terms of consequences.
So let's start with this request for Peter Mandelson to tell Congress what he knows. First of all, should we start with who it is that's made this request, Andrea? Just tell us who it is that's written this letter.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is something that we have to be careful about. So it's 2 Democratic members of the committee. It's not the committee as a whole. And, in our system here, the party that's in charge of Congress, and in this case, the House, is in charge. And so they will make the decisions ultimately about who is compelled to come testify. And they've not issued a subpoena. What they've said in this letter that went over today, mind you, it is Friday the 13th too. Probably, I'm sure Sir Mandelson is quite aware of that.
He's had quite a lot of Friday the 13th recently.
Yeah, exactly. But they're asking for a transcribed interview, so they're not asking for him to come back to the United States, but they are asking for him to appear. And I really don't know whether he has to comply. I don't think that that's necessarily the case. But it is, of course, important that this Epstein case is just spilling over and having so many impacts, so much impact across the globe, whether it's in Norway and Britain. Most recently, now the head of Dubai ports has had to step down, so it's really having a lot of consequences. And I know 3 members of your government have had to step down. Starmer's weakened, of course, through all this, and yet here in the United States, where it all kind of began, the epicenter of it, we've seen very little in terms of consequences.
Has there been much commentary, Andrea, about the fact that Mandelson was the ambassador to the US, seemingly had a reasonably practical and working relationship with the president, that there were those kind of close connections with US kind of society, political society in DC, which obviously came crashing and burning around him a couple of months ago? Is there much discussed about that?
I think that I think that for us here in the United States, Mandelson is in some ways a bit player, right? He was here as ambassador. He played a big role in getting the trade deal across the finish line, but I think sort of out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah,
which is maybe a horrible thing to say, but we've got sort of bigger fish to fry at the moment.
Yeah, no, I think that's valid. What then is the significance of these 2 members of the committee kind of going out alone in this request? Why do they do that? What's the thinking there?
Well, they're making a point, right? They're doing the work of basically the opposition, which has forced the release of these files in the first place, and they are expressing their frustration about the lack of candor, and so many of these files are redacted. So if you look at them, anybody can go and look at them. It's actually quite easy to do. You just go to the Justice Department website, click Epstein, and then you're in and you can search. It's a remarkably easy thing to do, and it has some striking results. So there are millions of documents. We are still going through them. At Reuters, all news organizations everywhere are going through them. And I was doing a search because I also am covering the nomination process for the new Fed chair, Kevin Warsh, who's also named in these files or shows up in these files. Now, some of the documents are very repetitive and some are very innocuous, but the cast of characters that are in association with Epstein is just extraordinary. I mean, just this one document that I looked at, that Kevin Warsh, the nominee to become chair of the Fed, also listed were Jimmy Buffett, Harvey Weinstein, David Geffen, you know, bankers, Raymond McGuire from Lazard, just an extraordinary amalgam of people that were in this universe around Epstein. And what these Congress people have said is, okay, you are no longer the British ambassador to the United States, but you know Epstein, you knew him. That is clear from these documents. You received payments from him, something like $75,000, they say, and there are pictures of you together. You acknowledge this relationship. You clearly knew more about him than we're able to learn from these documents. So they're asking him to come and testify. I don't know what he'll do. I don't think he's responded before.
No, he's certainly not said anything publicly for a number of weeks now. I just wonder, finally, on Mandelson and on the Epstein files, is the committee pursuing others? And I'm thinking of Americans in the same way. Clearly, when somebody like Mandelson receives this letter, that immediately makes all of us pay attention over here. I'm just wondering if they are asking for US-based witnesses to come forward as well.
Yes, well, we've had a number of lawmakers, both Republicans and Democrats, go and view the unredacted files. They've complained separately that there are still many, many redactions in those files, which the Justice Department says it did not redact, but those are redactions, meaning, big black magic marker, that was done by the FBI, by the investigating authority. But a number of lawmakers have come forward and said that they are just appalled and disgusted by what they've read, and they've promised and pledged to compel people to come forward and speak to the committee.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to be in for many, many more months, of possibly years, of Epstein investigations as people try to unpack both what he did, but also these relationships that existed and what information was exchanged. I mean, I think that's the thing that's, I think Mandelson has said that he does not recall receiving money from Epstein, but there is this allegation that he passed information about a $500 billion bailout to Epstein shortly before it was decided, when he was still at the European Commission. And that's very troubling,
Yeah.
Playing loose and fast with the rules here.
Yeah, to say the least. Can I go on, Andrea? I just want to ask you about Donald Trump saying overnight that regime change in Iran is the best thing that could happen. This is a couple of weeks now after he pledged to help protesters, and he didn't, but to all intents and purposes. Just bring us up to date with what the president's been saying on Iran.
Well, the president went to visit some troops today in Fort Bragg, and these are the elite forces that participated and carried out the extraction of Nicolas Maduro from Venezuela. And while he was there, he was asked about Iran, and he said exactly what you've just said, that, that regime change may be the best option. And he also declared and said that there's another aircraft carrier heading to the region, and that tremendous power will soon be in the region. He's been saying this for some time. It's getting to be more and more of a reality. And so indeed, as we head into a holiday weekend here, we are very much aware that there's a possibility of some kind of strike happening. It's hard to imagine that we're having this conversation, but here we are.
Andrea, thank you so much. Thank you for your time and insight on all of the above. Appreciate that.